Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and we have a lot to discuss today with all sorts of changes going on in baseball over the past few days. Hope everyone has been doing well and has been able to try and stay warm with these winter months really starting to ramp up here. And the cold weather has really hit Pittsburgh hard, I gotta say. But I hear we are supposed to, well, before actually today, I thought that we were going to have an early spring, but apparently Puxatawny Phil saw his shadow, so that means 6 more weeks of winter, unfortunately. But it's going to be over eventually. So at some point or another, the warm weather is going to come back, and we'll be able to wear shorts and a T-shirt, and we won't have to wear 80 million different layers just to stay warm. So anyways, getting into the show for today. I'll have a lot to discuss, all sorts of things going around the league. I'll also touch on another fun segment here in a little bit to wrap up the show. But I'll first get right into any and all of the latest news circulating around the league and discuss which teams have made that, what additions or subtractions to their rosters recently. Afterwards, I'll get into a prediction of the NL West and share which team I could see being atop the division and which teams I could see still having a hard time fighting for a top 3 finish. And now, as I move out of predicting the NL West, I'll rank my best divisions in baseball and share which divisions I think have the most amount of talent and could be the most competitive this year. But be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll give a long list of my favorite mascots in baseball today and discuss any interesting or unusual stories as to how they became mascots. So a really fun show today, a lot of things going on, but I want to get into the first bit of news because there's been a lot of things circulating around, but we want to first, I think, highlight the retiring of one player who, if you're in my age range, so around, early to mid-20s, you probably, knew this player pretty well and probably watched him quite a bit growing up when you were younger, and that is Dustin Pedroia. He's walking away from the game of baseball after playing for the Boston Red Sox for 13 years, and growing up, he was, I think, one of the most, I don't want to say iconic because that's a really, really big word, but he was one of the most memorable Red Sox players of my childhood. I would say him, David Ortiz, Manny Ramirez, and as I started to get a little bit older as a kid, maybe Curt Schilling towards kind of the end of his career. But I would say those three really, I would say, highlight me growing up as a kid, who I thought of for the Boston Red Sox. The first 3 names that came to mind were Dustin Pedroia, David Ortiz, and Manny Ramirez. He was an insane player. He was really, really good. He had a great first couple years in the league. He won an MVP in 2008. He won a Rookie of the Year in 2007. He was a 4-time All-Star, 4-time Gold Glove winner, a Silver Slugger. The list goes on and on and on. Not to mention, he won 3 World Series titles with the Red Sox, and he was part of that very, very, very talented 2007 team. Now, he wasn't as big of a contributor on the 2018 team, as his career, I think, started to wind down a little bit, ran into some injuries, some nagging injuries, I would say, also that really hindered him towards the latter part of his career. But in all honesty, a lot of front office management people in the Red Sox organization, they all had nothing but nice things to say about Dustin Pedroia, and I think it really speaks volume to who he was as a player, but also who he is as a person, right? And we always talk about players' character off the field and how they carry themselves also on the field, but he was somebody that carried himself very well both on and off the field. He's also the only player in MLB history to win a World Series, an MVP, a Rookie of the Year, and a Gold Glove award, all within his first 2 years of his career. So somebody that really, I would say, bursted onto the scene very, very quickly, and he really was very impactful those first 2-3 years in Boston. He was still really good, as years went on, but once you get into 2015, 2016, 2017, his numbers are still there, but I don't know if it's at the level or the intensity and really the impact that it was earlier on in his career. He He ranks 11th all-time in Red Sox history with over 1,500 games played. He's second most in club history, also in that category as a second baseman. So he, although his career kind of towards the end featured a lot of injuries, he still played a lot of games. He still saw a lot of action. He's a career .299 batter with a .365 OBP. He ranks top 10 in Red Sox history in, here's the list, hits, doubles, runs, steals, extra base hits, total bases, and at-bats. So 8 different categories. He's top 10 in Red Sox history. So not too shabby of a career, I would say. A consistent player. He had a great glove. He had a solid bat. Again, towards the end of his career, he started to battle a lot of injuries. There was only 2 times from 2006 to 2014 that he played under 100 games in the season. But then over the last 5 years of his career, so from 2015 on, he only played over 100 games in 2 of those years. So the last 5 years really were, you could tell, kind of starting to unravel, I think, quicker than he expected. But those first 8 or 9 years, he was very impactful, he was very healthy, and he really was a huge part of that Red Sox team. He's going to go down as one of the top second basemen of all time, I would say of this generation at least, and then also of Red Sox history. He's definitely one of the best to ever play over there for the Sox. So again, congratulations to Dustin Pedroia. Nothing but good luck and good wishes and just health overall moving into retirement and to whatever he will be taking on later on in his career or in the next stage, next chapter of his life. But I want to now dive into some trade rumors, obviously, and just a little bit of free agency stuff, as the Angels actually have found themselves yet again in the news, and they are in the market for a pitcher from the Baltimore Orioles. Now, Alex Cobb, who a lot of people feel is the ace currently as of right now for the Baltimore Orioles, didn't have a great year, a little over a 4 ERA. He's really struggled since he's come to Baltimore. Actually, this is really interesting. The 6 years before he got to Baltimore that he was in Tampa Bay for, he had a combined 3.5 ERA in those 6 years with the Rays. But then he comes to the Orioles, and over the last 3 years, his ERA has been upwards of 5 when he's been in Baltimore. And he's also dealt with a major injury, a lumbar strain in 2019. So he did have a great first part of his career. He's not really been trending in the right direction lately, but I think that if the Angels got Cobb, it would add a great deal of depth to their rotation. Might be a little bit of a sigh of relief for a team that they had one of the worst team ERAs in baseball last year. They were ranked 25th in the majors in the category, so they clearly were not a very good team on the mound. And I think Cobb, although he didn't have a great 2020, I think that if he's on maybe a little bit of a better team, can provide a little bit more run support, run insurance, whatever, I think that could definitely be kind of interesting to see how he impacts this Angels team, because I've said it before, they've got a lot of talent. They do have a lot of guys on that team that can either put the ball in play or they can score runs. And I think that they're just a couple pitchers away to breaking this drought that they've been in that I talked about earlier on last week in the last show, earlier on this week. And I think that if they can get substantial pitching, I'm not saying superstar pitching, I'm just saying something that's going to just get them by for the time being, and they can really try and ride out the hitting that they have, because they've got a lot of hitting. You've got Shohei Ohtani, you've got Anthony Rendon, you've got Mike Trout, you've added Jose Iglesias, who also came over from the Orioles, and I just really think that they need to go out and maybe get, I don't know, a piece or two more here and there. I mean, Albert Pujols, he's still somewhat productive. I wouldn't say that he's nearly as productive as he used to be, but I think he still has a little bit left in the tank. But Cobb coming to the Angels would be very, very interesting. And like I mentioned, he was very good with the Rays beforehand, so he is capable. He has displayed an ability to play at a high level in the majors. And what's interesting, actually, about the Angels trying to make a deal with the Orioles is that Dylan Bundy, who right now is technically their ace, he was actually with the Orioles before, and he was traded to the Angels, and he had a breakout year this season after he gets traded. So if this does go through, we'll have to see. Maybe Alex Cobb could be the next beneficiary of that same kind of theme that's been going on between LA and Baltimore. But there's also been another massive, and I mean massive, deal done between the Rockies and Cardinals that I briefly addressed in a previous episode, but I didn't go full into it because the story had broke actually mid-episode, so I didn't get to unpack it much, but I want to do that now. And it featured the Rockies sending Nolan Arenado over to the St. Louis Cardinals. Now, this is a deal that is groundbreaking, if you ask me. The deal has just recently gone into effect, because at one point they were still finalizing it. It was reported that it was going to go through, but I will say recently it has gone through and it has been an accepted trade, so he will be going to St. Louis. This is good. This is by far the biggest acquisition that the any NL Central team has had this offseason, and not to mention just a huge add for the Cardinals roster. Arenado, even though he's coming off a really tough 2020, he's been great in Colorado. I mean, he's a consistent Gold Glove third baseman. Each season he's actually been in the league, he's been a Gold Glover. He's a 5-time All-Star, 4-time Silver Slugger, 3-time NL home run leader, and a 2-time RBI leader. The guy is coming off a year, not 2020, but in 2019, where he had over 40 home runs. The guy can hit. The guy can field. I think it's going to be a nice piece for the Cardinals. Now, again, I don't think he's a guy. You're not going to go all the way with just adding one guy, and the rest of their team is, I mean, you've got Paul Goldschmidt, obviously. You've got DeYoung, I don't know what to think of him. You know, Colton Wong, I don't really know. There's a lot of guys that I don't really know what to think of. The only guys that I am for sure 100% sold on is Arenado right now. You know, again, he just recently was added to the team. So as of now, Arenado and Goldschmidt. Other than that, I don't really have a ton of faith in anybody else consistently at the plate. But this team has overall struggled hitting for the last couple years. I mean, they've finished in the bottom half of the league in team average for the last 3 seasons. And not to mention, they haven't really been that great in those 4 seasons that they've really struggled from the plate. So I think we can all see where they need to kind of correct and what they need to do to fix that issue, because this NL Central is not going to be good this year. So if somebody makes a big move like this, like we are just now seeing, it definitely could be potentially a huge move, a huge change. And so I think that it could definitely swing, you know, the vote towards the Cardinals if it does pan out well, if guys stay healthy, if he stays healthy. But in addition, he's owed a lot of money. And so that is the one thing that I do kind of question, because this is a team that it was supposedly going to be, you know, keeping their payroll down, and now I believe they're reaching that $200 million max that you start getting taxed on. The Rockies, they are sending about $50 million in cash over to St. Louis to try and help pay Arenado's contract down. And in the trade, actually, in the agreement, in the contract, he's been given his no-trade clause, but he still has the option to opt out in 2021 and in 2022. So who knows if he actually sticks around, right? That's another thing. I mean, he just signed this extension in 2019. It was an 8-year extension, and this was technically the first year in that extension. So it's like, so you're going to get up and leave right now? I mean, that kind of gives me the idea that at any certain point of time, if it's not going in the way that he likes, he might be gone. And if he's got those opt-out situations in his contract, then that could mean the same thing. He could say, hey, I want out, and that's that. So I would be very careful if I'm the Cardinals. I wouldn't get terribly comfortable right now, maybe just for this year, but I would have to see how this plays out in the future. The Rockies, again, they're another team that they're really struggling, and I think that was a big part of why he wasn't happy. He's coming off a career year in 2019. He had .315 average, 41 homers, and 118 RBIs. So clearly the guy can hit, right? And I've already mentioned he can field. So if you add him to a lineup with him and Goldschmidt, this could be a pretty, I would say, strong team in the Central. But again, I don't think they're going to really be challenged a whole lot by anybody, just because there's nobody really that competitive in the Central. And I hate to say that with me being a fan of the Milwaukee Brewers, but they don't seem like a major threat this year. And who knows if Yelich is going to come back ready to roll. I mean, I think they've had, you know, some pleasant surprises pitching-wise, both in the bullpen and the rotation. But teams like the Reds, again, I'm not sold on them, because they came into this past season with all the hype from the offseason, and they really, I would say, underwhelmed in performance overall. I mean, Mascots did not have a good year. Yeah, he was injury-ridden, and yeah, we had this pandemic and so on and so forth. But there was other guys that also played really well this year, so it clearly didn't affect everybody in the same way. So, and the Pirates, we all know what they're doing, and the Cubs, they kind of seem to be doing the same thing. Maybe not as drastic as the Pirates have made it seem, but they are still looking to, I think, at least rebuild for the future a little bit, or at least maybe go back to the drawing board a little bit more than they had expected. So I think that this Arenado trade, it could be the one tipping point that puts the Cardinals in first place this year. But I think that I don't think it's going to be a move that puts them way into the playoff conversation. It's hard in baseball for one guy to make that big of a difference to the point where the team is going to the NLCS or the ALCS or the World Series. Maybe they'll go to the playoffs. I could definitely see that because, again, I don't see them really having any sort of a challenger in the NL Central. But again, with that being said, I don't know how far in the playoffs they'll go. So we'll have to see. This is going to be a very interesting situation to watch because Arenado does seem to get a little, I would say, unsettled if he's not happy where he's at, and then he has a tendency to leave. And as we saw, he wanted out, he got traded, and now he's got this opt-out clause in his contract for 2 separate years. So who knows? If he winds up not being happy after the second year, maybe he's gone. Maybe even after this year he's gone. So it's a situation we should definitely keep an eye on. So I'll definitely be paying very close attention this year to the St. Louis Cardinals. But I'll wrap up this news-filled segment with just one more major development, I would say, in the MLB, and specifically in the NL East, actually, as the Phillies have yet again signed another much-needed piece for their success, as shortstop Didi Gregorius has agreed to a 2-year, $28 million deal. And really, I think that Dave Dombrowski, he deserves a gold medal. I think he deserves a gold medal and the key to the city of Philadelphia, because the guy has done everything that he needed to do and more. He went out, he addressed the bullpen issues, went out and got Archie Bradley, if I'm not mistaken. And then he goes out, he re-signs JT Realmuto, he re-signs Didi Gregorius. And so you're bringing back 2 huge pieces to a team that was tied for 8th in the MLB in team average. So that was huge that he did that. I think that they still have some issues to address pitching-wise, especially with the starting pitching and the bullpen pitching. But him bringing back Realmuto and Gregorius, it's bringing back a good portion of that lineup. And Gregorius brings a solid glove with him. He batted .284 in 2020 with 10 homers and 41 RBIs. He slugged .488 last year, and he had an .827 OPS, and we all know what Realmuto did. I mean, I feel like I've been a broken record the amount of times I've talked about him. But there were many free agent shortstops that Dave Dombrowski did want. I mean, it was rumored that he wanted to get Marcus Semien and then Andrelton Simmons, but both of them went off the board. So they were really left with just Didi. And so they kind of had to figure out, all right, how are we going to work a deal? He did a nice job of doing that. Sure, it's only 2 years. I think that they can make the playoffs in the next 2 years. I really do. I have high hopes for this Phillies team because they are bringing back guys. So that means, hopefully they are enthused about being back in Philadelphia. They have figured out their contract situations, and so that is always a sigh of relief. And as a result, I think it's going to ease up everybody's playing ability, because you're not having to think about your contract. You're not having to think about the offseason, free agency, where am I going to be playing. Things are a little bit more certain, and as a result, I think it then leads into people being a little bit more laid back, relaxed, and not as uptight about things. And so I think that's going to be good, having Realmuto and Didi Gregorius back in Philadelphia, and them knowing that they'll be there for a little bit, and the other guys on the team knowing that too. So they can build some sort of chemistry, camaraderie, and this team is very talented. I don't know if people realize that. They've got a lot of talented guys in that lineup. And I think it's just a matter of them getting some extra pitching, because this was one of the worst, if not the worst, bullpen ERAs in the last 90 years in baseball. So that tells you right there what they needed to address and what kind of issues they've been having. If they continue to look for some pitching, maybe they go out and get another hitter, maybe. But I would definitely focus on the pitching, because I know that they are reaching that luxury tax limit, and so you definitely don't want to get hit with that. But at the same time, you do want to make the moves that you think are going to be worth it. And I think that these are moves that are definitely worth it in the long run, especially with what Gregorius and Realmuto both bring to the table, and what they obviously proved that they are capable of doing last year in a Phillies uniform. So hopefully they can come back this year and do the same thing. But I've got good high hopes, I would say, for the Phillies this season. And I know that at times last year I didn't know what to think of the Phillies. Sometimes I was sold on them, sometimes I wasn't. They were a very streaky team. They'd win 6 in a row, they'd lose 7 in a row. They'd win 5 in a row, they'd lose 8 in a row. So very streaky, so we'll have to see if they can stay consistent. But I will say, Dave Dombrowski, you deserve a medal for what you've done so far with this Phillies team. But that'll do it for us in this first segment, folks. But don't go anywhere, because when I get back from the commercial break, I'm going to give my prediction and preview for the NL West this year and share who I think will finish atop the leaderboard. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour with you all, and in our first segment, I jumped into some news to get everybody going for the episode, and I also shared any latest trade news and signings in the baseball world. But be sure to stay right here for the final segment today, as I'll get into discussing which MLB teams have the best mascots and which mascots have been my favorite over the years, and I'll even share any and all stories as to what inspired the idea for these particular mascots. But I want to now get into a prediction of the NL West and share my thoughts as to who I could see finishing atop the leaderboard in the NL West. So I'm going to start from 5 and work my way all the way to 1, because I really do think that this is going to be an interesting division this year. I think we could see a little bit of a change in power, if you will, and I think that we could definitely see some shakeups atop the leaderboard, but down at the bottom, I don't think so as much. But getting into number 5, I'm going to go with the Colorado Rockies. I think that's where they're going to land. I think that I just don't know what to think of this Rockies team, right? I grew up as a kid always kind of being aware that the Rockies were really good. I mean, when they had gone to that World Series, I believe it was 07, or no, not 07, maybe it was 07. I can't remember what year they went, 07, 08, 06, somewhere in the mid to later 2000s, they went to a World Series. And I just remember always growing up thinking the Rockies were very, very good. But I think that with the loss of Arenado, this is definitely going to be a drastically different team, and not to mention they also lost Daniel Murphy. I know that he wasn't much of a help, but I just think that this Rockies team is not what they used to be, and I think that it's going to continue to get worse for them because, A, they've lost, again, Daniel Murphy, who I think was one of the better just straight professional hitters, just a guy that could, if you needed a ball out of the infield, he was going to do that for you, whether it was an actual hit or if it was going to be a sac fly. Daniel Murphy was just a straight-up professional hitter. He just knew what to do. Nolan Arenado is a potential future Hall of Famer. He's one of the best fielding and hitting third basemen in baseball. And then not to mention, this is going to be a huge make-or-break year, I think, for the Rockies, but also for Trevor Story. His contract's going to be up. He's going to be part of that huge free agency class of shortstops in 2021. So if things don't go well in Colorado for a second straight year, I think that they could lose another superstar, and if that's the case, it could really, really start to thin out in their talent. So I really don't have high hopes for them this year. Blackmon, again, Charlie Blackmon is the one guy I would say is kind of their saving grace as of right now. He's been, I think, very, very good for them all across the board. At one point or another last year, he was batting nearly 500. Now everybody was saying, oh, is he going to bat 400? No, he didn't bat 400. He actually wound up finishing around 300, just barely above 300. But they also really suffered, I think, pitching-wise. And that's another thing that, although they do have some hitting and they could maybe find their way to some wins with the hitting, the pitching, it's just not going to take them anywhere. I mean, this pitching staff is coming off a year where they had the second highest team ERA with just under a 6 ERA in the MLB. A 5.59 ERA. So 3 of the last 4 seasons also have featured the Rockies finishing 20th or higher in team ERA. So they've never cracked outside of the top 20 in the last 4 to 5 years, the last 3 to 4 years. And that's a really frightening thing, that you haven't been able to correct that main issue, which seems to be pitching, and it continues to really haunt them over and over again. They have signed, or re-signed, I should say, a bunch of guys, some young talent like Raimel Tapia. He had a huge season this past year, batted .321. He played in 51 games, and he actually played in the 4th most games on the team. So somebody that could maybe develop into a good player, and maybe that's what they're banking on. You know, they get rid of Arenado, they get that payroll off of, you know, having to pay that, and then maybe, you know, that's something that could open up the door for some other some other potential maybe free agents down the road. Maybe that's going to open up the door for them to maybe try and re-sign Trevor Story in the offseason of next year. A lot of different things. But this is another team that had one of the worst first-to-worst meltdowns in a year. I mean, they started out really strong, and then they just progressively got worse. They got worse and worse and worse, and it just continued to kind of snowball for them. And it was just kind of shocking to watch a team that was at one point first in the NL West. They were 8-3. And then they just completely fizzled out. I mean, I think they lost 7 of their next 8, and they just could not get out of that hole. So this is a team that I think they've got talent, and I think that they have it in certain places. I just don't think that they have the depth to make any sort of a serious run. They're kind of a surface team, right? On the surface, they've got a couple guys that really highlight the team, Trevor Story, Charlie Blackmon, but then after that, it kind of just fizzles out. We'll see if Tapia can be a guy that can, rise up and become one of the faces of the Rockies. But losing Arenado, that's a huge piece out of their lineup. So I'm going to predict that the Rockies are going to finish in dead last in the NL West this year. Then coming in at fourth place that I have, or at least I'm predicting them to finish in fourth place this year in the NL West, the Arizona Diamondbacks. I mean, this is another team that I think has really fallen on hard times. They finished dead last a year ago in the West. They only had 25 wins this past year, and again, that's not even half of your games that you're winning in a 60-game season. They also have some talent. I don't know how much of it, though, and I don't know how reliable it is. Ketel Marte, I would say, is their one bright, shining star. He's really good. I think he's a very, very talented middle infielder. He's got a solid bat. Doesn't have great power numbers, but he's got really good just overall contact numbers. Then you also have Starling Marte. But Starling Marte is an interesting case because he's owed a lot of money. I believe it's either this year or next year. And so that makes me wonder, what are they going to do with him? Are we going to see him, again, on the trading block for yet again another time around? I mean, he's already gone from the Pirates to the Marlins, and then he's actually not with the Diamondbacks anymore. I just realized that because he got traded from the Diamondbacks to the Marlins. So they don't even have Starling Marte anymore. So it's just really Ketel Marte. I would say Cole Calhoun is another guy that could potentially be pretty good because he's got great power numbers. He was leaps and bounds their leading home run hitter with 16 because their next closest guy was Christian Walker with 7. So, I mean, you already got rid of Starling Marte during the trade deadline, and Starling Marte was hitting above 360 with them, and then he goes to Miami, and then he bats below 240. So a huge drop-off there. But again, Ketel Marte is, I would say, the main piece in this team. Cole Calhoun would be a nice power-hitting DH kind of guy, somebody that just is going to drive in a lot of runs for you. But then they had guys like David Peralta who kind of shined through, I would say, out of nowhere, batted above 300, right at 300. I'm just kind of curious to see what happens with their pitching. Again, I think they've got enough hitting for some instances, some wins. They're a very comparable team to the Rockies, a team that they have a couple surface players that on the surface you really highlight and you really talk about, but then after that, there's nobody really there after the fact. There's nobody really there supporting. So I don't think they have the depth, and they definitely need to get the pitching. Archie Bradley's no longer with the team, so, that's their main closer, and he's gone. You also have Robbie Ray gone, and that really leaves Zach Gallen to kind of fend for himself. I think Madison Bumgarner should retire. I don't think Madison Bumgarner has been good in the last 2 years. And I think that he should retire or that they need to get rid of him because he was atrocious in 2020. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he comes back this year, he has a much better season. Him and Gallen really maybe take off and they become kind of this two-man tandem, if you will. I just don't see them having any depth to really go far, and then I really don't see them having any pitching either, especially out of the bullpen. So maybe if they can, down the road, get some pieces. I know that a couple of the guys they got from the Blue Jays in exchange for Robbie Ray, I believe they're top-tier prospects. One of them, I think, is a lefty. So maybe they'll develop them. Maybe they'll turn into the next big thing, and, who knows? It could surround Gallen with some good pitching, and who knows what they'll do with Madison Bumgarner. But I could definitely see them at one point or another kind of, I don't want to say cash in their chips, but they could start trading guys here down the road and if things don't really pan out well for them, if they're not able to put together any sort of run. I could definitely see them trading some pieces, building for the future, and then maybe coming back as a little bit of a better team down the road. But I'm going to say they're going to finish in fourth place. So getting in my top 3, coming in at number 3 that I think is going to be the San Francisco Giants. I'm very interested in this team, mainly because I think that they have some pieces, but they're going to need to add a lot. I mean, a lot. And again, this is a team that in a year from now, I think they're going to be big-time buyers. I think that next offseason they're going to be very active. They've got guys like Jeff Samardzija, Brandon Belt, Brandon Crawford. All their contracts are going to be up very soon. So I could see the Giants being a team that is potentially in the market for a shortstop, like Trevor Story. So I could see that happening. You also have Carlos Correa. He'll be a free agent. You also have Francisco Lindor. He'll be a free agent, depending on what he does in New York. So this could be a big buyer team in a year or so from now, looking to go get some major pieces with a lot of that payroll being freed up with those 3 guys off of their salary. So I think that could be a huge thing to play into their back pocket. But then they also have the emergence of guys like Mike Yastrzemski, who I think has become a really, really nice piece on their team. Donovan Solano had an awesome season last year. I thought that he was very underappreciated. For a second base shortstop guy, I think that he was very, very underappreciated. I think Solano did a nice job all year long. Now, what's interesting about Solano is that he has not played in a full season in a while, and when he has, his numbers aren't as great. So could he just have kind of one of these lucky years? It was a 60-game season, and that's how that's where he really thrives the most, is when it's just minimal games. But then as the season goes on, he starts to fizzle out. We'll have to see how he fares in a full-length season. They also have some young up-and-coming talent like Joey Bart. They're young and up-and-coming, promising catcher behind the plate. But that brings into my next point is, what will Buster Posey do? With all of the uncertainty with the virus, him having already sat out this past year due to the virus and the fears of coronavirus, I could definitely see him sitting out again. I mean, if things are not in the clear and 100%, I mean, he was pretty adamant about not coming back last year, so maybe that's the same case this year. I do think that they did a nice job at re-signing some pitching. I think that was an area that they needed to address. Kevin Gausman, Drew Smiley, two guys that they needed to bring back, and they were two main pieces of their, I would say, main six starters. And they were, not to mention, two of the main six starters that had below a 4 ERA on their team. The other one being Trevor Cahill. So they really needed to bring back some pitching, because if they had lost those two and let those two walk in free agency, it would have been a really, really tough time in San Francisco this year. And I probably would have had an even tougher time deciding who would be in third place between these three teams, because I think that's the difference, is that San Francisco has a little bit more pitching here and there than Arizona and Colorado does. I don't necessarily think that they have way more talented players. I just think that they have the necessities to make them a better team overall. I do, again, question this team's depth. They are not nearly as deep as these next two teams that I will get into, and they, again, I don't think have the surface players on the outside when everybody's looking at their team on paper that wows a lot of people. I think Yastrzemski might be the only one that kind of wows me, and then Buster Posey, but if he plays. And in all honesty, 2019 was not a very good year for Buster Posey. I believe he only played in 50 games, batted around 250, 260. So could we start seeing kind of a decline in Buster Posey's game? Who knows? But I'm going to predict them coming in third place. And then getting into my last two teams, coming in number 2, this is going to be a shock. And I know it's going to be a shock. The LA Dodgers. I see the Dodgers finishing in second place this year because I just don't know if they added anything that special. Look at what also they lost. They lost Kike Hernandez, who, although he wasn't a great hitter, he was a solid utility guy. He's a guy that floats around your entire infield. You could even put him in the outfield. He's a guy that's a reliable bat when you need one, and he's just a solid player to have on your team that can fill any sort of void. Jock Peterson now signing with the Chicago Cubs, so now you've lost a huge, heavy batter in that lineup. Not a great average hitter guy, but a really good OPS guy and a great home run hitter. Not to mention David Price sitting out again last year due to COVID. Same kind of situation with Buster Posey. Are we going to see David Price back on the mound for the LA Dodgers this year if things with COVID continue to roar on and things do not get any better and the vaccine still stalls and this, that, and the other? I will say, though, they're bringing back arguably one of the best baseball players in baseball in Mookie Betts. They're also bringing back a former MVP not too long ago in Cody Bellinger. You've got Max Muncy, Corey Seager. The list goes on and on and on, right? But you're also losing another guy that a lot of people felt was kind of the main piece in this team's success, and that's Justin Turner. Justin Turner, a lot of people feel, was kind of the heartbeat of this team, and with him not being there potentially this year, that's a huge void to fill at third base. So it makes me wonder, is this team really trying to build for a repeat? I don't think that they are. They haven't added anybody that big. They haven't really added anyone at that. They re-signed Blake Trinan. They did a couple re-signings here and there. But this is a team that finished in the top of the top in the league in many major categories. And I just don't know if they capitalized on that or they built on that. And that's why I feel that they're not going to finish in first, because I think that although they've got the great foundation and they have built on that, they haven't necessarily added anything, and other teams around them have added needed pieces. They have gone out and added pieces that are going to potentially put them at the same level as the Dodgers or even put them a little bit higher. And so that's why I'm really kind of wavering on this idea of, like, will the Dodgers actually be a first-place team? I definitely think that they'll be a playoff team. There's no question about that. They'll find their way into the playoffs. They're the LA Dodgers. But will they be the NL West champions? I don't think so. Will they be the World Series champions? Absolutely not. I do not think that they would be the World Series champions because, again, I just don't think that they added anything that special, and they lost more than they gained. And as a result, it's kind of like, all right, yeah, you've got this, like, really, they kind of have this really great toy that they had at one point, but then the toy now is missing, like, 2 or 3 of the pieces. So it's like, what's the point of even playing with it now? And that's what happened. Last year they had a World Series team, and you don't really add anything to it, but you lose the pieces to it. So it's like, okay, are you still that same team? I mean, you lost a lot of the pieces that you had last year that helped you win. So I'm definitely not sold on the Dodgers this year. I think that if they maybe make 1 or 2 big splashes before spring training starts, maybe that'll change my mind. But as of right now, and with how Cody Bellinger played last year, how other certain guys hit last year, not sold. I think that their most dangerous player is Mookie Betts. I think that Bellinger's next, and then Seager is right there with them. Those are their top 3 guys. Max Muncy can do a lot of damage as well, and the pitching is great. That's not really changed much, but they are still missing a guy over at second. They're still missing a guy over at third. They're still missing guys in the line. There's someone out in the outfield. They're still missing guys around the field that I just feel like they need to go out and address those issues before it gets too late. So coming in at number 1, I think we can all guess who I have. I've got the San Diego Padres. This is actually one of my favorite teams to win the division, maybe even win the NL, and maybe even potentially the World Series. This team is really good. They have one of the most stacked lineups in baseball. You've got Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, Will Myers, Jake Cronenworth, Will Hosmer, and then you've got Austin Nola. So you've got a lot of guys that can hit the ball, and hit the ball far, and hit the ball consistently far. That's 6 guys right off the cuff that I named that were all impactful players, I would say. And then you throw in the pitching that they have. They added Blake Snell, who was a Cy Young winner 2 years ago. And then they added Yu Darvish, who is a Cy Young finalist coming off this year, coming off a year where he was tied in the MLB for the entire MLB lead in wins. He had just about a 2 ERA. It was one of the lowest ERAs he's had in the last 4 or 5 years. And they've added both of those guys. And I think that if they had added maybe 1 or 2, or that's the Dodgers at least, if the Dodgers had added maybe 1 or 2 guys, I would have maybe said the Dodgers would still win. But again, they didn't really do that. They didn't do anything. And so the Padres go out, they get Snell, they get Darvish, they get all these pieces. They go out and get Joe Musgrove. You've got Mike Clevenger already there. You've got Dinelson Lamet there. You've got one of the most fearful, if not the most feared, starting rotation in all of baseball. It is pretty frightening to watch, I've got to say. So I've got the Padres winning it all in the NL West. I'm really sold on this team. I think with all the additions that they made, with the team that they already have, they're, again, very comparable to the Dodgers. The Dodgers and the Padres have 2 really good, solid foundations that they're building on. But the Padres have built up much quicker and much higher this offseason than the Dodgers have. So we'll see if it works and pans out for them, or if it comes crashing down. But I personally think that the San Diego Padres will be the NL West champions this year. But that's just my prediction. So running through them again one more time, Rockies at 5, Diamondbacks at 4, Giants at 3, Dodgers at 2, and the Padres being the NL West champions. So we'll see how that plays out, but nonetheless, it's going to be a fun season out west for baseball. So that'll close things out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial, I'm going to stick with this theme of divisions in baseball and rank my top divisions in all of the majors as of right now. It's been a lot of fun so far, folks, but we got a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again, and in the previous segment, I got right into discussing the prediction for the NL West and sharing who I think will fall where within the West. There's going to be some, I think, very serious battles out in the West. I think that it's definitely going to be a battle of two top-tier teams, if you will, between the Padres and the Dodgers. We'll have to see how the Giants and the Rockies and the Diamondbacks kind of fill in the rest of the spots, but I definitely think that the Padres and Dodgers are going to make that a very, very entertaining division to watch. But I want to hop into a little bit of a different discussion, but kind of along the same lines. I want to now get into a ranking of the different divisions in the MLB and share who I think has the most talent across the board in which division. So I'm going to start from 6 and work my way all the way to 1. So coming in at number 6, and honestly, I kind of feel bad for this division because I think that they have some teams that have some talent, but they just are never able to put it together, and it's the AL West. There's really only 2 legitimate teams in that division that I'm actually worried about, or that I would be concerned about if I was a fellow AL team. The Astros and the A's, right? I mean, the A's have been pretty consistent. They've won in a very unorthodox way, I would say, of getting not necessarily no name, but not mainstream superstar talent on their roster and not having to pay a fortune for anybody, and really just winning with building and structuring a lineup based off of other ways, right? Statistics, different numbers, different kind of ways of looking at a team other than just, okay, this guy's got great numbers, we can pay him a lot of money, we're going to do that, because they're a pretty low payroll team. They're one of the lowest payroll teams. But the Astros, in the most recent memory, I would say, they've been really good. They've been very, very good. They've had a lot of success. Although there has been some scandal behind it, they still have been very successful. Now, I would say before A.J. Hinch got there, back in probably 2013, 2014, prior to that, they were the laughingstock of the MLB. So it really hasn't been that long that they've been a legitimate team, but they're both the A's and the Astros, they're really the only 2 legitimate teams that I would be concerned about in that division. Now, what's coincidental is that the best player all around in baseball, arguably, in Mike Trout, he plays for the Angels. He's in that division, but I would not say his team is that good or that scary. I will say, though, over the last 2 or 3 years, they have gone out and they have gotten good pieces. For whatever reason, they cannot put it together. I don't know what it is. They've got a lot of talent. They've got Shohei Ohtani. They've got Jose Iglesias now. They've got Anthony Rendon now. And now you go out and you also have Mike Trout. I don't know how they're not able to put it together. Now, obviously, I think that it's going to take more than just 3 or 4 guys for a team to be really good. And they need to go out and add more pitching. They need to add more depth. They don't add enough extra, I would say, help for their mainstream, superstar players like Mike Trout and Anthony Rendon. They really have to shoulder a lot of the burden offensively because there isn't really anybody else that is going to step up to the plate. The Rangers and the Mariners, I really don't see them being a threat anytime soon, in all honesty. I mean, the Angels and the Mariners, they have 2 of the longest playoff droughts going on right now in the MLB. And then the Rangers, they also have a playoff drought themselves. So all 3 of those teams have struggled in their most recent years. And I think that again, it's very obvious to tell that every single year, as of recently, you can tell who's going to be atop the leaderboard in the AL West. It's going to either be the A's or the Astros, one of the 2. Last year, it was the A's, and the Astros, again, they hobbled their way into a playoff appearance because nobody else in their division was good. There was literally nobody else in their division that put up any sort of a fight. Maybe the Angels, but the Rangers and the Mariners, they are now the laughingstock of the MLB. I think that the Rangers can get back to a playoff-type style of play sooner than the Mariners can, but I don't see really either team going anywhere anytime soon. I just feel that they don't have the pieces, they don't have the personnel. Now, they could have some guy that goes off for an absolute monster season, has kind of a breakout 2021 season, and then that really kind of puts them on the map. They go out and get some pieces in the offseason next year, and then maybe 2022, 2023, they can come back and they can be really, really good. But I just feel like the Angels, they should be much better than they are. I think that the Mariners, they've got good young talent with Kyle Lewis. The Rangers, I think that they still have some kinks to work out. But that's why I'm only putting the AL West at 6, because there's literally only 2 teams that are legitimate. And one of those teams, the A's, I mean, they're not even, I would say, that scary once they get into the playoffs. This team is a team that once they get into the playoffs, it's usually maybe the first round, and then maybe you get to the second round, and that's it. You don't get anywhere past that. So I think that the Astros are the only team that have really done anything substantial in the last 5 years in that division, and then the second closest is the Athletics, and the last three, they haven't done much. So I'm putting the AL West at 6 right now, but then coming in at number 5, and I hate to do this, but it's the NL Central. And I know that they had 4 teams make the playoffs out of 5 teams that are in the division this past year, so that is something really good. But one of them went in with a losing record, and 2 of the other 3, they didn't really have that great of years. I mean, you look at the Reds, if they hadn't won, I think it was 7 of the last 8 towards the end of the season, or 9 of their last 10 or whatever it was, probably a very different story as well. You probably would not have seen the Reds in the playoffs. Same thing with the Cardinals. I mean, they got bounced out of the playoffs early by the San Diego Padres. And it was pretty obvious, too. I mean, the Cardinals, they did win a game, but there was 2 other games where, you know, the Padres, they were putting up a lot of runs on the Cardinals, and it was just not the Cardinals team that I think we're used to seeing playing well in the playoffs and going far. They just don't have that personnel right now. And really, if you look at the entire division, I would say that it's a very challenging division to try and attract talent to, because nobody really wants to be in Pittsburgh, nobody really wants to be in Cincinnati, nobody really wants to be in Milwaukee, and I don't think many people want to be in St. Louis. At least players don't really want to be. So outside of Chicago, it's a very small market division, and I think that is why it's very hard to bring in top-tier, big-name talent to some of these teams, because they don't have big payrolls. I would say it's one of those divisions where across the board, most of the teams are pretty similar in their payrolls, and I think that goes a lot into it. They don't have the money to pay some guys, and so as a result, you're going to get a lot of teams that, yeah, they do have talent, but a lot of the talent might have been homegrown in the inside of the organization, within the team, from the farm system all the way up, or it could have been talent that was acquired in a trade, whatever it might have been. I wouldn't say that there's any necessarily huge free agents landing in the NL Central and really looking to go play there. And I know I've talked about this before. This upcoming year is going to be a really challenging year for the NL Central and for the teams in it, because these teams, they rely on stadium attendance. They rely on ticket sales. They rely on in-game, in-concession stand sales inside of the stadium. And if there's no fans or little to no fans, that could pose a big problem, and that could, again, filter into and trickle down into what they do with the team, obviously, but also just their payroll, who they pay, when, you know, whatever it might be. And so I think that is why they really struggle at times with getting talent, but also being, you know, a really, really top-tier division. I will say 3 of the 5 teams last year did have a 500-plus winning percentage, but again, technically, I would say, you know, it wasn't the most glamorous looking 500-plus winning percentage teams. They weren't necessarily wowing anybody. I mean, the Reds, they came in and they were terrible to start the year. They were one of the worst teams in baseball at one point or another, and they were one of the most disappointing teams after the offseason moves that they made. The Brewers, I mean, I think a lot of it had to do with Christian Yelich. He did not play very well. They had great pitching, but the hitting was just non-existent. And then the Cardinals, I don't think they had anybody to really turn to as kind of a superstar, somebody that's a big-name player that is going to make a difference for them. And then the Pirates, we all know what the deal is with the Pirates. Everybody knows what the deal is with the Pirates. They are in a mode of, we are not trying to win right now. We are trying to rebuild so we can win for the future. And I definitely think that is going to be something that continues on with, you know, the Pirates until they're able to put together a team that they feel comfortable with and that they feel confident in. The Cubs were the real only team that I felt were actually a good team. Now, what was ironic about them was this. Nobody was talking about the Cubs much, and they had an incredible record. And now I think about why they probably were not talked about much. It's because they weren't necessarily playing any real good teams. In the NL Central, they had no competition. Now, when they would play the AL Central, that was a totally different ballpark. That was a totally different kind of dynamic. They were not used to playing these teams on a consistent basis like that, but they did do pretty well from what I remember against the Indians, the White Sox, and the Twins. They get into the playoffs, and you can tell. And I also was very puzzled as to why they were so good during the year, because if you looked at their lineup, they had a lot of guys hitting sub 250. I mean, even sub 200. And you're kind of sitting there wondering, why in the world is this team a legitimate team and a playoff contending team when they don't have anybody that's hitting even above 300 or even above, you know, an 850 OPS or 800 OPS at that. So I really was kind of, confused by that. Then you get into the playoffs, and then you kind of see their demise. You see them fall apart. They're not able to get any hitting against the Marlins, and as a result, they lose to the Marlins. So I definitely think that this is a division that is going to fall on hard times. I hate to say that because my Brewers are in this division, so that definitely pains me to say that. But I just don't see, unless Christian Yelich has a bounce back year, and the Brewers are really, unless all these teams have bounce back seasons. They've been together now for a whole year, at least, teams like Cincinnati, a new team, they came in, it was a pandemic-filled year, they probably were not in great rhythm, they weren't in sync at all, and now, maybe after a long off season and a little bit of a shortened season of last year, maybe they'll come back this year, with a full head of steam, and they'll have a little bit of a better season. Obviously, the Cardinals adding Nolan Arenado, that's going to do something to the division. That's definitely going to open up some doors, possibly for the Cardinals at least. I don't know if the Cubs are going to be that team that is the dominating team that everybody knows them as, at least what they've been like in the most recent years, because from 2016 on, I would say that they've been one of the better teams in baseball. Now I would say that they've also kind of plateaued a little bit. I mean, I think that they peaked really, really aggressively, and then it kind of just flattened out from there. But they have, what's very ironic about this team is they've actually got a great competition. All of the teams in the division seem to be within the same kind of general kind of level, if you will, from one another, right? I mean, the Cardinals and the Cubs, they're probably historically a little bit higher up. Same thing with the Pirates a little bit. The Reds, the Brewers, so. The Reds historically, yeah. All those teams have been historically good, but recently I would say that they're all pretty even in terms of talent and in terms of just overall ability. I think that it's one of the more competitive divisions, but that's what's ironic about it is that it's not that great of competition, but amongst each other, it's pretty good. So I have them coming in at 5. I really don't have high hopes for them this year, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these teams come in ready to roll once, the season starts, whenever that date is, and they actually, put together a pretty good season. We'll have to see. But getting into number 4, the AL Central. And this is a division that kind of can go either way for me. They can either be a really great division or they can be a really bad division. This was another division that had 3 of the 5 teams that had a 500-plus winning percentage, but then also 3 of those 5 teams, they also had a 580 and up winning percentage. So they actually had a much higher winning percentage overall, kind of a baseline, than the NL Central did. And this is a year that I think, really 2 teams would be legitimate, I would say. Outside of, the White Sox and the Twins, I don't know what to think of the Indians. The Indians are kind of this swing team for me. I think that they could be either really good or they could be really bad. Francisco Lindor not there anymore. That's gonna pose a big issue for them, I think. That's a big hole in their lineup, and they're gonna have to fill that void somehow, some way. And I think that this year is really gonna be a battle between the White Sox and the Twins. And even in that situation, I don't think it'll be that much of a battle because the White Sox, they're so stacked this year. They add so many pieces. Now, the Twins, they did recently just re-sign Nelson Cruz, so that was a big add, only for 1 more year, though, but still, you have him around for another year. The White Sox, overall, though, in terms of the entire league and the entire MLB, they're one of the most stacked teams. They're one of the most loaded teams with one of the most, the most surplus of talent, I would say, across the board. And I think that this is going to be the main reason why people, I would say, give any respect towards the AL Central. It will because of the White Sox. That will be the main reason because the White Sox, you look at that team and who they have and then who they added over the offseason. It's going to be pretty insane to see them go up against other top-tier teams and see how they fare. I have a lot of high hopes for this team. I have a lot of high expectations for this team. So, again, I'm expecting them to come in this year really with a full head of steam, ready to build off of last year because they made a lot of great off-season moves. You go out, you get Tony La Russa. Now, I don't know why you do that because, again, he's a little bit older, might be a little bit outdated in terms of his baseball thinking, but nonetheless, still a winning manager and one of the best of all time. So I think it's going to make for a very interesting season in Chicago. But again, back to the other teams, the Twins, I think that they'll be good. I think they'll be the typical Twins team that's good in the regular season, good enough to get to the playoffs, and then they lose in the first round of the playoffs. The Indians, I don't see anything special with them because, personally, I don't think that they've added anything that special, and they've lost more than they've gained. And so as a result, it's kind of, similar to the Dodgers, right? They've lost more than they've gained, and it's kind of hard to say, oh, yeah, they're going to be the same team they were last year. well, what have they added? What have they taken away? And if the subtractions outweigh the additions, then there's the problem right there. The Tigers and the Royals, I think, are going to be interesting teams. I don't know if necessarily they'll be good this year, but I could see them being good down the road. And I could see, maybe the Royals being out of those two teams, a team that really fares well, because they've made some very good moves in the offseason. They've been very active for the most part, and I really, really like the kind of direction I think they're going in. And I think that they're slowly trying to get back to that mid-2010s form that they were in a couple years ago. Honestly, I mean, it was not that far back that they were in the World Series and winning the World Series. For the Tigers, I think the first step in the right direction was getting somebody like A.J. Hinch. I think A.J. Hinch is a very wise addition as a manager, mainly because he's had experience rebuilding teams from the ground up. I mean, the project he had coming to Houston, that probably was a big-time project for him to try and build that winning team up and try and take that team from worst to first. And he did do that. Now, again, there was some scandal behind it, but it was still done nonetheless. So I've got the AL Central coming in at 4. So right now, again, number 6 AL West, number 5 NL Central, number 4 AL Central, and we'll get into our top 3 here. And coming in at number 3, the AL East. I think the AL East is a good division. I think that they have 3 teams that can at least battle it out this year. I think they've got 3 legitimate teams. The Blue Jays being one of those 3 teams, they've soared through the ranks, I would say, of not only that division, but also the entire league. I mean, I think they're slowly going to become one of the better teams in the AL overall because of just not only the additions that they made, but also how well some of those guys played last year and the blowout and the breakout seasons that they had a year ago. And I think that's going to be just a nice little build-off for this year so they can continue on this trend. I don't really know what to think of the Rays. That's one team that I'm a little bit skeptical of because they, again, another team that has lost a lot. They haven't gained as much. They just got Chris Archer back, actually. They signed him to a 1-year deal. I don't know if that's going to do anything. I think Chris Archer is way past the point of where he used to be. I think that in Pittsburgh it did way more harm to his career than it did to help his career. And as a result, I think they might just be getting a shell of Chris Archer's former self in Tampa Bay. So I'm not really sure what to think of this Rays team, right? I mean, they were not a very good power-hitting team. A lot of the times why they were so good in the playoffs was because of the pitching. And you lose Blake Snell and Charlie Morton, 2 of those 3 really good pitchers that you have in that rotation. So that kind of makes me wonder, all right, what's going to happen this year? I mean, how is this rotation going to look? You obviously have Glass now. You did go out and get Michael Wacha, but he's coming off a very poor year. And then Chris Archer, and Chris Archer's been injury-ridden over the last few years. And even when he's not, he's either striking somebody out, which is a good thing, or he's getting absolutely rocked and somebody's hitting a home run off of him, which is not a good thing. So I'm not sure what to think of the Rays, but the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Orioles, the Red Sox and Yankees, I mean, they're always going to be there, right? And I think that the Yankees more so this year, re-signing DJ LeMahieu was very wise. Obviously, going out and getting Corey Kluber was a very wise move as well. You also get Jameson Taillon, which I'm not really sure what to think of, but it's another guy that could have some potential and that could definitely come in and have an impact immediately because of all of, what the scouts say and kind of what the scouting report is on him. I just don't know if it's going to be enough to take them all the way and really be that next step that they can take to going to the World Series because they've got great hitting. But then the pitching, it definitely falters very, very often. And I think that is their kryptonite. That is their downfall there. The Red Sox, I don't know what to think of them because although I think that they'll still be good this year, I think that they had a lot of guys struggle last year. I think they're still kind of adjusting to Mookie Betts not being there anymore. I think that they also, they're going to benefit from getting Chris Sale back, Eduardo Rodriguez back. But Sale's going to be, of what I've read and heard, he's going to be slowly worked back into a rhythm. So first couple months of the season might not be a glamorous start for the Red Sox. So the Red Sox, they could be in a little bit of, I don't want to say a rebuild phase, but kind of just a down period in their organization. So I definitely think, as of right now, the Rays and the Yankees are 2 teams that I'm going to be, or the Blue Jays and the Yankees are 2 teams I'm going to be paying very close attention to. The third team, it's a toss-up between the Red Sox and the Rays. One of those 2 teams I feel could have good years. And then the Orioles, I think they're just still a couple years away, right? I think they still have some pieces that they need to add. I think they have some personnel they still need to go out and get. And I think that they eventually they will be up there with those other teams, but I just don't think it's right now. But in all honesty, this AL East division reminds me a little bit of the NL West, and this is why. It's two always very steady, powerful teams. So in the NL West, you've got the Dodgers, and then in the AL East, you've got the Yankees. I mean, they're always very, very steady teams, and you could also slash the Yankees with the Red Sox because they're both kind of there. But now you've got in both divisions, you've got a team that have added enough competition to, or at least enough talent to make it competitive in those divisions. In the AL East, it's the Blue Jays, and then in the NL West, it's the Padres. So again, two teams or two divisions where each division has one team that's usually at the top and one team that has now quickly emerged as a potential contender because of the offseason moves they've made. So I'm really excited to see where this AL East division kind of goes and all the talent that will be in it this year. But then getting into the final two and coming in at number 2, the NL West. And this is going to be a close, I think, final two between these last two divisions because the NL West, they've got a ton of talent. They have so many talent. I mean, at least atop the division. But throughout the rest of the division, it's pretty thin talent-wise. I mean, the Diamondbacks, they don't really scare me, right? I mean, you got Cole Calhoun, sure. You've got Ketel Marte, okay, and David Peralta. But David Peralta, I wouldn't say is a formidable opponent. And Cole Calhoun, he's just a big power-hitting home run guy. I mean, kind of reminds me of an Adam Dunn almost. And Ketel Marte is, I would say, the legitimate piece that they have. Then the Rockies, they aren't that threatening. I mean, Arenado no longer there. Trevor Story and Charlie Blackmon, I would say, are the two big pieces for the Colorado Rockies. And then the Giants, they really just have, in my personal opinion, Mike Yastrzemski, maybe Donovan Solano if you want to throw him up there, and then Buster Posey if he does come back. But these other two teams, they are just absolutely stacked with talent. And it's kind of, you work your way from the bottom up of the division, and you see the Diamondbacks, the Rockies, the Giants, and you're like, okay, all right, there's a couple guys here that are pretty good. And then you get to the Padres and Dodgers, and it's just, wow, there is just so many talented guys in this division, but it's, again, atop the leaderboard. The Padres have really shot up in the ranks, I think, because of the additions that they've made to their roster. I definitely think that they have made moves that are going to pay off for them, and I think that and I mentioned in my previous segment, I think that they could beat the Dodgers out for the first place spot in the NL West. I really do believe that. So the NL West is my second best division, but my number one MLB division in baseball, the NL East. This is an absolutely stacked division, I think, and I think it's going to be a year where we're going to see a lot of talented guys, and not to mention the talent is spread out throughout a lot of different teams. It's not backlogged onto two teams. You've got Gregorius, you've got Harper, you've got JT Realmuto, Rhys Hoskins, Alec Baum, all on one team. And then over for the Nationals, you've got Josh Bell now, Kyle Schwarber, Juan Soto, Trey Turner, Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg. The list goes on and on and on. And then over for the Braves, you've got Freddie Freeman. You've got Ozzie Albies. You've got Ronald Acuna Jr. You've got Max Fried. And then you also have added Charlie Morton over the offseason. And then for the Mets, I mean, where do we start with the Mets, right? You've got Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Noah Syndergaard, Jacob deGrom, James McCann, Dominic Smith, Michael Conforto, J.D. Davis, Jeff McNeil. Literally so many talented guys in this division. And not to mention the best closer in baseball, too, Brad Hand. He's on the Nationals now. So I definitely think that they are the best division, and I think that this might be the most competitive division with the most teams being competitive. I could see it being a very tight three-way race towards the top of the NL East. I could definitely see that. Maybe a fourth a team might make their way into that. I really don't think the Marlins have enough to compete with these teams, especially of what they've added over the offseason. Although they did make the playoffs this past year, I mean, there was only two teams in the NL East that got to the playoffs, and most of those teams in the NL East were not very good this year. The Mets were disappointing. The Phillies were disappointing. The Nationals were one of the worst teams in baseball. So it was really just the Braves and the Marlins, and I think the Marlins benefited from, a very odd year and a very peculiar season, and as a result, they took advantage of that, and the other three teams, they did not do that as much. So I think that across the board, this division has a lot of talent throughout a lot of different teams, and so that is kind of an intriguing thing to me and really catches my eye, and that is why I'm really kind of pushing them to be that number one division, because the most amount of talent is spread out throughout the most amount of teams. I mean, 4 out of the 5 teams, and I just rattled off, I would say, on each team, 2 to 3 guys that could either be potential all-stars they have already been All-Stars, or that they are going to be All-Stars sooner rather than later. So that's my ranking of the divisions. I'm going to go AL West in number 6, NL Central number 5, AL Central number 4, AL East number 3, NL West number 2, and NL East number 1. So those are my top 6. So, we'll see how that plays out. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the NL Central will be the best division in baseball. Who knows? Maybe the AL West will be, and the Rangers and Mariners have really good years. We can only tell, right? I mean, time will only tell, and we are rapidly approaching baseball season whenever it's going to start. But, folks, that'll do it for us in this final segment, this third segment. Thanks for sticking around as always. Stay right there because we'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I'll get into my favorite MLB mascots and discuss some interesting stories as to how they started. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back here for the final segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you. And in the previous segment, I got right in ranking the different divisions in baseball and mentioning which divisions I think are the best in baseball right now. I want to finish things out with another pretty fun, I would say, topic and kind of conversation discussing some very interesting mascots in baseball and kind of what the stories are behind some of these mascots as to how they came to be. So, as we all know, most of these teams, they don't really have a mascot that is exactly what their team name is, right? I mean, for example, the Pittsburgh Pirates, they don't actually have a pirate as a mascot. Or the Baltimore Orioles, they do have an Oriole as a mascot. I'm trying to think of some other teams that don't necessarily have exactly what their team name is as their mascot. I mean, you look at a team like the Giants, right? I mean, they don't have a giant as a mascot. Their mascot is actually a sea lion. Her name is Lou Seal, L-O-U, and then Seal. So I think that's what's very interesting and kind of creative about mascots and what I've always loved about them, not only in baseball, but all of sports, right? They're kind of symbolic of the team name, but they're not necessarily exactly what the team name is. So it kind of hints at it, right? It kind of adds to that idea and that overall theme of what that name is supposed to be, what it resembles, and how it kind of signifies that particular area in the country. So getting into some really interesting ones that I'm a real big fan of. There's only a couple that I want to run through. So the first one I want to get into is Dinger. Dinger is a mascot for the Rockies, Dinger the dinosaur. First off, it's a great name. I mean, because you look at where Coors Field is, it's in Colorado, so the air is very thin. And everybody knows that Colorado's ballpark is a hitter's ballpark. So the name Dinger is very appropriate because most likely you'll be able to hit a dinger out of the park. But where they came up with the idea of a dinosaur is what's very, very intriguing to me. Because when they were starting to dig up the ground for Coors Field and they were starting to kind of excavate and make the construction plan for building the stadium, they actually unearthed some dinosaur fossils. I don't know how many. I don't believe there was a ton, but there were some that they found, and they actually, I think they have them on display somewhere, or maybe they've kept them somewhere in a vault. I don't know. But the legend is that, again, dinosaurs were found underneath Coors Field's ground, and then once the team kind of became a team in 1994, 1995, the team then kind of went out and said, oh, look, we found a dinosaur egg while we were excavating the ground for Coors Field. Come to the game, come to the opening day or whatever and check out, the unveiling or check out what we found or whatever. And they unveiled it, and it was this large plastic, dinosaur egg, and out came Dinger the dinosaur. And so Dinger the dinosaur was born. So I really, really, really do love that idea. I love the name. I love the concept. A little bit of a resemblance of Barney, kind of. So I think that's another kind of interesting play on things. I just really enjoy the unique I mean, that's not even something that resembles what Colorado is. It's just some kind of interesting backstory to how the stadium got started, and as a result, you kind of take that and you run with it. I think that the promotion people did a phenomenal job with that, whoever came up with that. I thought, hey, somebody was really thinking that day. So, big fan of Dinger the Dinosaur, but then another one that I really like is Mariner Moose for the Mariners. Now, again, you don't really think of moose, or of, I don't really, moose, you don't really think of them in the Pacific Northwest. That's, at least I don't I've never been there, but I could be very wrong, but I don't really, think of them being in the Pacific Northwest much. This is how it came to be. The Mariners changed ownership in the early 90s, and they wanted to kind of have a little bit of a new theme, maybe a little bit of a new kind of, I don't know, kind of identity, if you will. They wanted to start things over a little bit. So the promotion team, the advertising team, they got a little creative. They said, we're going to start a contest for kids 14 and younger, and they're going to be able to write in to the Mariners ideas for the new mascot. And so this one little kid named Eamon Spiller, he was a 5th grader, and he wrote in and he said he thought that a moose would be a great concept and it'd be a really good mascot. And he said that because moose are really fun, they're really exciting animals, and that's what the Mariners are. They're a fun team, and they're always able to have fun no matter what. So obviously the Mariners, they loved it, and Eamon himself won $1,000, I believe, and he also won his school $1,000. So they went with the moose, and it's stuck ever since. So, and I really like it's kind of, when you look at the moose, it's a very inviting, warming mascot. It's somebody that's just, it's not an aggressive animal. It's not, you just think of a moose, right? And I think that, him walking around with a Mariners jersey, it's very probably kid-like, and it's probably, again, very welcoming for a lot of fans. And so I think that's what's really great about it. And people don't realize how welcoming mascots can be and how they can kind of make people feel at home almost because of just what they do. They come up, pat you on the back, they give you a high five, a fist bump, whatever, and it's kind of part of that game day entertainment that I think a lot of people really enjoy and they really kind of, seek out, in addition to obviously watching baseball, but it's not really, I would say, the main, thing. Obviously, is that obviously the main thing of going to a baseball game is watching the baseball game, but the other extra things that come with it, seeing the mascot and this, that, and the other, that's what makes it that makes the experience full. That makes it a full, solid sport, experience at the ballpark. So those are the first two I want to talk about, and I want to get into a couple of classic ones. You got Mr. Met for the Mets. Initially, he was a cartoon drawing, actually. One of the older mascots, I would say. He initially came into existence kind of in the 60s, and then he also has a family. So they call them the Mets. They're the Mr. and Mrs. Met, and then 3 little Mets. And Mrs. Met was introduced a couple years after the fact with their children, but actually Mr. Met is believed to be the first mascot to appear in human form in the MLB ever. And again, he's not obviously a human because he's got a head that's a baseball, but it's the humanoid resemblance that is kind of what's unique about him. Mr. Met and then Mr. Redleg, so we'll hear about in a little bit, those are kind of the first 2 humanoid-esque resembling mascots in baseball, I would say, and Mr. Met being arguably the first one ever. He's one of the most iconic mascots in sports, without a doubt. And I've always loved the simplicity of it. I've always just loved how it's, his head's a baseball and he's Mr. Met. Not to mention the name's great, right? Mr. Met, it's got a great run to it. It's got a great ring to it. So I really like that one. And then getting to another one, the Pirate the Parrot. This is actually a very interesting story. So initially, the Pirate Parrot came into play in 1979. And the costume that they had was kind of this rough, kind of like creepy looking, I would say, like a big bird that you wouldn't want to hang around. Kind of looked a little weird. And actually, that mascot, whoever was the mascot, he had gotten fired for drug use on the job and also distribution of drugs. And he also, I think, was just not a great character. I think he was actually very unfriendly to a lot of fans. People were not very fond of him at all. The Pirates, the reason why they wanted to get a mascot is because the Phillies had just gotten their mascot, the Fanatic, not too far back after the fact. They actually, I think, got their mascot in 1977. And then in 1979, that's when the Parrot came into play, right? So I think that's a very interesting one. Obviously, it kind of has a little bit of an homage to the Long John Silver's companion in Treasure Island, but then it also actually was modeled after the San Diego Chicken. That was the famous mascot for many years for the San Diego Padres. Probably one of the most famous mascots, I would say. And so I've always been a big fan of the Pirate Parrot. They wound up changing kind of the look of the Pirate Parrot after, that other mascot kind of got fired and, things did not go well. They went with more of kind of a bigger, more colorful, kind of lighthearted and fun mascot for kids. And I think it's a very smart move. So getting into a couple other ones, Slugger for the Royals, makes sense, right? Lions are considered royalty in the jungle, and the Royals are royalty. So, and I like how his head kind of turns into a crown. It's almost like his mane has been taken with a lot of just like gel or something, and they spiked it up, and it looks like a crown almost. It's very creative. I really like it. But he's a good one. Mr. Redlegs for the Reds. It's another classic one. Like I mentioned, he's very, I would say, in the same ballpark and kind of the same boat as Mr. Met, two very classic ones. It's supposed to signify, actually, and I didn't know this, the anti-communist movement of the Red Scare in the 1950s. In Cincinnati, they wanted to be called the Redlegs because they wanted to get away from that term of the Reds that resembled the Communist Party. So it was actually some political background to this one, and I was not aware of that. I did not even realize that. And there's actually two versions of Mr. Redlegs. So they initially had one, and he, I believe, did have a mustache. And then they added another one years later that didn't have a mustache. So now they've got two that kind of exist simultaneously, one that's kind of the old one that's kind of the new one. And I think that's also very kind of interesting, having two separate mascots, but there's only one thing that differentiates them, and it's a mustache, right? That's, I think, very interesting. So I'm a big fan of this one, of these two for sure. Mr. Redlegs is a good one, Slugger, but obviously I think Dinger and the Mariner Moose, they're kind of up there on my list. Pirate Parrot is definitely up there on my list. And then also just the last one I want to touch on, the Philly Fanatic for the Phillies. This is an interesting story as to how he came about. I did not know this, but I guess the team had reached out to the Muppets creator Jim Henson and asked them to get one of his illustrators to draw something up. And one of the drawers was actually the creator of Miss Piggy. And for anybody out there that's not a Muppets fan, I grew up watching the Muppets, so I absolutely adore the Muppets. Miss Piggy was, one of the Muppets that always had a thing for Kermit the Frog, if you will, and she was a very large part of the entire show. And so it was kind of a big deal, I think, having somebody that created that established of a character. Now you're creating a team mascot. And initially, the team actually did not get great reception from it. And so what they did was they started leasing out the design, and they never purchased the copyright. And this is where they went wrong. They could have spent a little over $5,000 for it initially, but then 3 years later, they wound up having to pay for the rights of over $500,000. So in 3 years, it actually became that big of a hit. And that's, I think, what would be aggravating as anything for me as an owner, saying, we should have capitalized on that. Why didn't we do that? And so I find that very interesting, kind of just, an interesting side note as to, what the design is. But he's also, I would say, one of the most energetic, one of the most well-known mascots. You always see him messing around with opposing players, the players for the Phillies, whomever. And I think his antics on the field, he really kind of draws a lot of attention towards himself, which I think is great. I love that. You want to have a mascot that is going to do that. You want to have a mascot that's going to basically get the crowd going a little bit or entertain the crowd somehow, some way, because like I've mentioned, mascots are a big part of the game day experience, especially for baseball, because you're kind of sitting there, if you're not somebody like myself who absolutely loves baseball and doesn't mind just sitting there watching the game and taking it all in, and you want a little bit more, and it's kind of a dry game, it's kind of not really going anywhere, then you look to the mascot. That's where the mascots come in, and that's where, they can really lighten the mood a little bit, lighten things up, and also bring some added entertainment, which I think is great. And also, fun fact, I didn't even realize this, but the Fanatic is actually a bird. I don't know how they came up with a bird on that one, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of, Sesame Street a little bit. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Sesame Street takes place in Philadelphia. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But it makes sense, now that I hear that Jim Henson was involved in this, because, he was a ginormous creator of the Muppets. He created the Muppets. And so I really, personally, as a fan of the Muppets, I kind of was like, oh, this is, definitely caught my eye. But there's a lot of other mascots out there that I've always been very intrigued by. I mean, you've got Screech for the Nationals, obviously. You've got the Baltimore Oriole, and you've got the Marlin for the Marlins. You've got Raymond Ray for the Rays or whatever. You've got the horse that wears the jersey, the 1972 jersey for the Texas Rangers. And the reason why he actually wears the number 72 is because that was the year that the Senators moved to Texas to become the Rangers. So a little bit of a history lesson there, pays a little homage. But like I mentioned, the Giants, they've got a seal lion. The Athletics, they've got the elephant. They've got Trumper the elephant. And so I think that that's what's really interesting about mascots and sports teams. You can kind of get creative, and it's a fun way to help fans remember those teams, to kind of remind them of who those teams are, and also just a symbol of those teams, really. And I think that's, again, if you've got a great mascot, I think you're going to have great fans, and you're going to have a great reception on game day, and people are going to enjoy it a little bit more. So mascots, they're much needed. And actually, a little fun fact, I was a mascot. I had an internship one summer with the Washington Nationals, and one of the duties I had to do was I had to be the Geico Gecko, because Geico is a huge sponsor for the Washington Nationals. So I had to wear a Geico Gecko suit. I didn't have to do it a bunch of times, but I did do it a couple times. And let me tell you what, it is hot. It is very hot, and you can't wipe any sweat off of you. So you have to basically wear some sort of head wrap, something to put on your head to try and keep the sweat off of coming down into your face and in your eyes, and because you can't wipe it off. There's nowhere that you can wipe it off because you're wearing this large costume, and your hands are a part of that costume. So it was there were some summer nights where it was really hot, and you take it off, and you were absolutely drenched in sweat. So regardless, if anybody out there has been a mascot, I feel your pain. It's actually kind of funny sometimes. I like to tell people that, and they kind of get a big kick out of it. And mascots overall, they're great. They're much needed, and I don't think that they should ever go anywhere, and I think that they're here to stay forever. And whoever came up with the concept of a mascot, you're a genius. So whoever thought of that, good thinking on your part. But folks, that'll do it for us today. Thank you again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd really appreciate that. Once again, everyone, thanks so much for listening today, and as always, have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.